This is Gerardo Del Real with Resource Stock Digest. Joining me today is President of Palamina Corp, Mr. Andrew Thomson. Andrew, how are you this afternoon?
Very good, thanks.
Let's go over this morning's news. More good news from one of the 5 district scale land packages that you've put together in Peru. Let's start with the headline and then let's talk about what it means. The headline reads, Palamina reports 620 grams per ton gold and 1.8 meters of 19.6 grams per ton gold at the Coasa project in Peru. Give me the details.
So previously, the campaign that we were running at Coasa was a chip sampling program where, again, we were seeing quite high grade, a 39 gram per ton material, from our chips. And so really the secret here is to go back and follow up with channel sampling. And what the channel sampling does, if it's horizontal and perpendicular, you're trying to now get volume or an understanding of whether or not the wall rocks, which in this case are slate, are also mineralized. So the significance of the high grade is really there as a chip sample just to show that we're finding different zones. So the last time that we spoke, we were quite encouraged that we found one visible gold zone. We're now up to 4 zones. And one of those new zones where we took a chip sample is running, it's 19.9 ounces, which is, bonanza grade for these style systems. So really that is a bit of a flash in the pan. But where it starts to become more important is when you do your channel sampling across, which in this case is rock saw, and those samples get sit in. When you start seeing mineable widths, i.e. 1.5 meters and above that at good grade, which in this case is 1.8 meters and 19.6 grams as a high, that's when it starts to get exciting, because that's when you can start building, or working towards something where you can get tonnage in a resource. And so we're quite encouraged that the slates, the initial chip samples were in quartz, as is the high grade here, but we're also seeing that mineralization in the wall rock, which are the slates. And there's a chart there with about 22 samples. I think about 20 of them are channel samples, and they're all very consistent in terms of the grade. And again, our a rule of thumb is that we're sort of looking at 1 gram per ton for open pit, and 6 gram per tons over, say, 1.5 meters at depth to be able to do what we call, underground mining. So from our perspective, we fulfill both those requirements with this program. So it's confirmed to us that we probably should drill this zone. And so, this is about as good as it gets in terms of getting results back.
Now, this is from the Veta zone. Is that correct, Andrew?
Yes.
And what area is this mineralization now covering? Give me a little bit of scale and perspective here.
So previously, I think it was 4 by 700 meters. Now it's 800 by 500 meters.
Wow.
And there's a much larger area. We're seeing anomalous values of, 1.8 by 500 meters, 1.8 kilometers by 500 meters. But really the main zone now that we're working, which is this 800 by 500 meter zone. Within it, there's about a 200 meter zone where we're seeing, in the release, you'll see that there's above 1 gram, which is really, to demonstrate that, we may have some potential for an open pit, but there's quite a few values there that range from about 4 grams to up to the 620. But more importantly, in the channels, we've got 0.9 of 100 grams. There's a 1.8 meters of 19.6 grams, 1.8 meters of 4.2 grams. These are over, roughly a 200 meter area. So we've got we're working out from that area to be able to, define more mineralized zones. So we're quite encouraged that, again, these programs that we're running are really starting to define a very specific area which we're seeing repeated in other zones within this trend. And so, again, we're out there working those now. We've got another program that we're running at Fusca. But to be clear, there's 9 anomalous zones on the property that we've identified. This is obviously one of the more promising zones, and it comes off the main Fusca structure. But, it really is telltale of what could be at depth.
Well, it's truly district scale. The last time you and I spoke, we talked about the Heliborne Geophysical survey that was underway. How is that coming along, and how is that aiding delineating these targets?
So at Kawasa, we're flying it on 3 of our properties. We're almost done on the 2 other properties, Gaban and Corey. I think they had 3 more lines to do on that one, and the helicopter went up today. At Kawasa, we're about half done. It's a higher elevation, so the weather's a little more difficult in the sense that we have to have clear days, so we've been spending more time in the others. But I suspect the schedule now says it'll be done in 5 days. The key thing to understand is that gold mining, their Crucero deposit, there's 2 million indicated inferred sub-economic ounces at today's gold price. But, Mother Nature has still provided 2 million ounces, so it puts a check mark on what I call the volume scale, in the sense that we've got a deposit in the same structure as our Fusca zone. And again, ours is offset, which, if you know anything about orogenic systems, it's all about structure, structure, structure. And typically when you see these offsets is where you'll get, you can get a fair amount of volume. And again, in our orogenic belt, there's Oyachea, where our guys drilled 81 kilometers. Most of our team is made up of former Oyachea explorationists. They defined a deposit there that's plus 1.2 million ounces that's open-ended. And then we have Rinconada, which is a deposit with informals. There's no stats on it, but there's 35,000 informal miners mining it today. And, we're quite certain it's produced at least 1.5 million ounces. So from our perspective, this is the same geology, more or less, in terms of the orogenic systems. It obviously has some different attributes, but that gives us some sense of the contribution in terms of there being volume skills. So the purpose of the helicopter survey, the geophysical survey, is there's also an association with pyrrhotite, which means that, normally you can't see gold with magnetics because it's not magnetic, but flying this when it's associated with pyrrhotite, we're quite certain that we'll be able to see the structure. So right now, our interpretation of Veta, as an example, is that it's a splay or something coming off the main Fusca zone. Again, it's at a higher elevation than the Fusca zone, but just even the visible geology of Fusca in these areas is quite significant. And so we're just really starting to get into this. So the next, we're getting a 43-101 done. We're applying for drill permits. We've got an environmental survey underway. So we're really readying it for a drill program now. And we know at least at Veta right now we've got drill targets to establish a third dimension.
Excellent. How are relations with the locals there? That social license is so critical, right?
So there's basically 3 different communities at Veta right now. We've had no issues. More recently, there was a local fair where we had a hot dog stand, or the equivalent of, and I think we gave away over 1,200 dinners to people at this fair, and so that was very well received. We tend to do things that benefit the entire community as opposed to buying a guy a computer. And so, to date, we've had no issues. We've started, obviously, negotiating. The good thing about this is a lot of it's private land, so they're individuals, and we're negotiating with them. And we've come up with certain parameters that are very affordable. And so we haven't seen any real issues. And we're in the process of trying to sign those up as part of our environmental, just the overall permitting, et cetera. For environmental and drilling, we have to have the surface rights in place. So, there are some areas that have communities on them, and again, we're not seeing any resistance or problems. So, cross your fingers. It's gone quite well so far.
And you mentioned the team earlier briefly. It's very experienced in Peru. Can you give a little bit of their background, just their experience there?
So Don MacGyver and Yuri Valdivieso, who are the 2 leads, they were the 2 senior geos at Minera IRL, and they were part of the team that, Oyachea was a known deposit, but they're really the ones to go in and systematically explore with what I would call a North American standard. And so again, all of our projects in this belt, have been known for some time in the sense that they've been ground truth by informals. The ground hasn't been available for, quite a while. And when all of it came open in one swoop, we picked up most of it. So where it gets quite interesting from my perspective is, again, at Oyachea, they drilled 81 kilometers, but there's also a mineral suite of that they understand that we need to have in place for there to be mineralization, specifically at depth. And so we need to see those signatures, and these are associations with things like arsenic, tungsten, et cetera. So we're seeing those as well in these areas. So from my perspective, when you've got two guys with 35 years experience in this belt, not only is it important from a geologic point of view, but I can tell you when we had to set up our office in Juliaca, when we had to navigate the roads, when we had to talk to the communities, all of that stuff is, we're not reinventing the wheel. So that really is why we're having real success in the field, being able to go as quickly as we can. And I can tell you, the one thing about being an explorationist is you can have all these things in place, but if Mother Nature isn't cooperating, a lot of the money that's raised, even if it all goes into the ground, if she's not cooperating, you've lost it. But in this case, the good news is that, as we suspected, the geological risk, in my opinion, is lower because of the experience and the ability to just go out and define these sorts of zones. It doesn't happen every day. So from my perspective, we're getting lucky. And part of it obviously has to do with the fact that, these guys know the terrain. And, I don't have to tell you, some of this is at elevation. They're acclimatized. They know how to work at those levels. It's an all Peruvian team. So, I'm very, very happy with the bang for the buck, if you want to call it that.
Share structure and market cap. Andrew, it's obviously early days, but you got 5 phenomenal land packages and another project in Mexico that doesn't get a lot of attention, and we'll talk about it another time. But what does the share structure and the market cap look like right now?
Well, our stock's up a little bit today with the news, but there's basically round numbers, we're under 30 million, just under 30 million shares out, just under, I think, 40 million fully diluted. We're trading at 34, 35 cents. The stock's up 2 or 3 cents today. Again, we're still sitting around about a $10 to $11 million market cap with about, I would say, 8% in cash right now, using those metrics. So, it's, again, the market right now is obviously dipped, but if you look at our chart and you look at the, the first year being acquisition and assessment, and this being the second year where we've chosen a project to take forward, I think we're fulfilling the mandate that we set out when we went to Peru, which is effectively to try and find a 1 million ounce plus gold deposit. And I think we're making very effective use of the funds that have been awarded us.
Well, it sounds like you have a busy rest of the year, Andrew. Thanks for the update. I'm looking forward to results as they trickle in. I assume you're going to have quite a steady stream of news flow here over the next couple of months.
Yeah, we've been monthly. We're pulling in somewhere between 150 to 350 assays, and we have been working Bendy, our other project, with. We're also seeing some glory there in terms of being able to find big systems and zones. So from my perspective, again, as we've had some interest from third parties. So I'm very confident that moving forward, we should be able to at least drill test some of these zones. And, again, this is when you see these sorts of bonanza grades, there's two ways of looking at it. It's an off slight occurrence, or there's actually something there. So, the cautious person would say, it's selective sampling, and, until you drill it, you won't know. But, the reality is that we've got a very experienced team. We're actually quite conservative in the way that we approach this stuff, in the sense we've immediately channeled it and gotten results. So we're not trying to live off that one number. And we just, this last press release was off something like 120 to 220 samples, depending on how you look at it. And again, it's very anomalous. So, the entire zone that we've defined, and I think it's going to get bigger. So from that perspective, again, I don't think it gets much better.
Fantastic. Andrew, thanks for the update. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Gerard.